taste it leaves in your mouth. You know the frustration. But thanks be to God that He is with us in spite of adversity. He's there. Amen. Yeah, He's there. And He loves us and He cares about us. Now, there is so much here. Let me read a couple of verses going on into chapter 7 and into 8. Wisdom gives strength to the wise, more than 10 rulers who are in a city. You think one king is strong? Put 10 together. Wisdom's stronger, wiser, more significant. Surely there is not a righteous man on earth who does good and never sins. I wrestled with that one for a while. Oh, God, help us. But remember, we talked about the fact that there's radical honesty in the book of Ecclesiastes. Radical honesty. And while we're aiming for good, we can struggle. We can say inappropriate things, not because we're malicious, but out of our humanity, out of our fatigue, out of our misunderstanding. And God, help us if we've hurt someone. God, help us if we need to go back and re-encourage them and admit our mistakes, admit our sin. God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Radical honesty. The upright person still can get caught up in scheming, Ecclesiastes is telling us. I don't like that, but there it is. Going to have to live with it. And when I feel that scheme coming on, you know what I have to do? I have to give that back to God, don't I? Take it, Lord. I don't need that. I don't need that. For there is a time and a way for everything. Although a person's trouble lies heavily on each one. A time and a place for everything, in spite of the trouble that's there. So what he's saying is trust God. We're going to talk about some questions now that kind of arise out of this reflective mood in which the writer has placed us, in which wisdom literature places us. And give it your best. Thank you, Pastor.
Okay, let's go ahead and circle up into our groups. I think everyone knows our groups now. I think everyone's sitting in our groups right now. We're also trying to deal
And you know, if you're going to work with a lot of freshman students and all, you got to have a little bit of a shtick, you know? You just... So seldom did I begin a lecture, at least without a cup of coffee in my hand. And if I didn't have a cup of coffee, especially first day of class, I'd get out my wallet and find a couple of bucks and say, okay, who's pretty fast? Who can run here? Send them down to the Bobby B's to get me a cup of coffee, you know. And it was just one of those things you just kind of had to keep drawing them in, you know, because their minds were other places. They weren't on the Old Testament Bible and life for certain. But as I look over those 30 years and a lot of flashbacks this morning, I realize that God's Word wants to teach us afresh this day. No matter how many times we've read it, no matter how many times we've thought about it, it wants to teach us something fresh even today. Now, you know, the unique thing about wisdom literature is the fact that it is grounded in human experience. I'm not certain it was merely divine revelation. I think it was revelation that certified it. But I'd asked Pastor Kevin if I could really go ahead and teach on it, but he said no. But do you know that? Do you know that place in Proverbs where it says it's better for a man to live in an attic than to have the full run of the house with a nagging wife? Did you ever read that? It's there. It's there. I thought, my goodness, experience is proving its own thing, isn't it? Yes. But experience is so important to us when we come to wisdom literature. We don't use wisdom sayings much in the Western world. You remember a stitch in time saves 9, right? You've heard of that? An apple a day keeps the doctor away. I want to tell you something. If I break my leg, I'm not going to Food for Less and buy an apple. I'm just not. I'm going to find me a good doctor. Make sure that things are taken care of. So what does an apple a day keeps the doctor away really try to say to us? It's not saying that if you eat apple every day, you'll never have to go to the doctor. That's not what it's saying. Isn't it kind of saying that maybe there is a relationship between our health and the way we eat? Isn't that what it's trying to say? Oh, but we're such good literalists. We want it to say, no, it says an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Get away. Go on, get out. Sorry. Wisdom literature. It's grounded in life, in the experiences of how God is dealing with us in the midst of our ongoing experiences. Pastor Kevin wanted me to make sure I reminded you that the material we're dealing with in chapters 7 and first part of 8 are rather counterintuitive. Now that's a great word, isn't it? Counterintuitive. I couldn't even spell it. I had to make sure I went back to his email so I could find it in the dictionary. But it has to do with our feelings and what's going on in culture and the differences that maybe we encounter. I'm banging things up here pretty good, aren't I? I'm sorry.
May change the battery out.
Is that how that works? Look at that. Good, thank you. Good. Good. Technical people are worth their weight, aren't they? That's good. Thank you. So this whole understanding of something being counterintuitive, going against the grain, if you please. As a kid growing up, didn't you want to be like your friends a lot of times? What they wore, how they acted, the phrases they used. Didn't want to be too different. And yet, there's a difference when we begin to read deep into Ecclesiastes or Proverbs. Some of the Psalms. Even when we think about what Paul's saying about the power of the cross, counterintuitive kind of stuff. But the Word speaks out even in the midst of a world that wants to kind of negotiate our lives on its terms rather than on God's terms. What drum is providing the beat by which we are marching, huh? Where are we getting our lead? What's taking place? How are we functioning in this world. And so, chapter 7 starts off with one of the 7 good things that are being talked about in the first half of chapter 7. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death better than the day of birth. Now you need to think about that one for a while. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind. Now let me stop there just for a moment and try to help us see some things. What we're reading here is the fact that we need perspective. And when we look at what the writer calls the house of mourning, at the possibilities of death, at what death is saying, we might be able to learn a tad more than if we're just going to have a good time and feast with a bunch of people and, watch some soccer on TV or whatever we might be doing. Are you into the World Cup? Anybody? A little bit? It's pretty good. So we can have a good time, but we don't always learn much. We're not really challenged. God wants us to use our minds, to use our experience, to reflect upon what really matters in the midst of the world in which we live. You see, I think that that's even what we could learn in celebrating the 4th of July as citizens of the United States. It's not just about freedom always being a good thing and always having the right answer and the United States always being powerful and wonderful. No. It gives us some time to reflect on what has happened in this 250-year period. One of the things that I would want to say that not too many people want to talk about, because I brought it up this week to people. I like to talk about the fact, do you realize how many missionaries have gone out to circle the globe with money that has been paid by church members in the United States of America to allow evangelism to take place? Hey, it's amazing to think of what has happened. And to many people, they say, evangelism, missions, what are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about how God has used a nation where there has been an era of freedom to be able to allow that to take place. The gospel to just make a difference wherever we might be. So it's our perspective, what we're learning, what is being accumulated in our lives. And you see, if Ecclesiastes is anything else, it has to be seen fundamentally as radically honest about the human condition. Radically honest about how we really examine life. He goes on to say, sorrow is better than laughter. For the sadness of the face, the heart is made glad. Wow. And you got to think about that a bit. That's not how we usually think. That's why this is a bit counterintuitive. Sorrow is better than laughter? Come on. This makes sense. Unless, again, we're trying to really understand the perspective of where we are and what happens and the difference that we make. You see, I am convinced that wisdom literature found its niche in Judaism as God saying to the people, if you would take the time, if you would make the effort, you can begin to understand that there are more important things than just chasing sunsets. There are more important things than just having something our way. There are more important things than just having a good time. It's how we put life together, how we begin to plan for the future, how we begin to think about human need, and how we can maybe lend a hand to help another. Are there people at Harvest Community who have that spiritual gift of helps? You see, sometimes we say, oh, it's just easier for some people than others. I'm just not that, I don't have that kind of compassion, you know. Don't expect that from me. Come on. Well, maybe you just haven't thought about it enough. Maybe you need to think why it is important that God allows us to even be able to encounter another. The good things, the bad things, the ups, the downs. He goes on, listen to what he says. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. I was telling some of you that I had a stint of pastoring in Hawaii, in Kaneohe, Hawaii, for nearly 4 years. And one of the great experiences of my life. And I had a church treasurer who was an older Japanese man who saw me in action one night at a board meeting and kind of directing things as only a young pastor kind of full of vigor could do, you know. And the next day he called me and said, Pastor, let's go out for a bowl of soup today. Guy Nakamoto taught me to eat soup. Pretty simple, pretty good. And all he wanted to say to me was, Pastor, win an argument, lose a friend. That's all he wanted to say. He saw me. I looked pretty good against some of those board members. I could out-argue some of them, and some of them just clammed up. They didn't want to get into it at all. But the old idea, win an argument, lose a friend. I want to tell you, when he told me that, it was just like he took a knife on. I think he was saying, I wasn't very proud of you, Pastor. You kind of showed your true colors, Pastor. You did something far more problematic than good. I want you to know that. He didn't say those other things. That was my interpretation of it. But I know it was there. That's how we read what's going on here, you see. Did you hear what I read? It is better to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. Have you ever been rebuked? That's not fun. It's difficult. For the crackling of thorns under a pot, so the laughter of fools. Now you need to think about that one for a while, but that's pretty good. As the crackling of thorns, you see, under a pot. That's just an amazing statement. For this is nothing but vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. What's he wanting to say? That when we get to the end, we're able to have that perspective of what has taken place and how God has used experiences. I was a sophomore in college back in Oklahoma. had a wonderful professor by the name of Oscar Reed, and he was standing there teaching these young people in a religion department hoping to move into ministry sometime. And Dr. Reed said, "You know, I hear a lot of talk about the will of God." And I think he said it on purpose, but he said, "You know how you determine the will of God?" He said, "You look over your shoulder and see where God has led you the last 20 years or so. And you begin to see how his hand has led you and provided the way for you." Now again, there I was, 19 years old. Hadn't even lived those 20 years. And he's telling us to look over our shoulder 20 years, see where God has led us. Where's God been leading you? Have you been able to put it together? Have you been willing to go to the right places and say no to the difficult places and to ascertain how God would have you to experience this life? I think the book of Ecclesiastes is wanting us to take time. Did you hear our song, the last song? God is involved in that time factor, and he wants to make a difference in how we make choices and how we choose. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Interesting. Next time you get a little bit angry, think of that one. Just think of that one. Say not, "Why were the former days better than these?" For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves life, the life of him who has it. Now this idea that wisdom is kind of the protection, like the protection of money. What's he saying? He's not saying money is the key. What he's saying is wisdom is the key. But if money can provide housing and clothing and nourishment and entertainment and all those things for which we use it, think of what wisdom can do. Think of how wisdom can begin to shape who we are. Now, you know, this book of Ecclesiastes doesn't define wisdom for us like Proverbs does. Doesn't talk about the narrative of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Doesn't talk about the covenants. Doesn't talk about any of that stuff. But I do think it assumes it. So we've got the story of Israel. We've got God's work with Israel. And laid upon the top of that is this wisdom material working on experience to help us understand life when we take 5 minutes to begin to think about it. I wish he would have said reflection is good for the soul, but he didn't get there, but he's certainly got that dimension through all of this. Consider the work of God. Now listen to this. Sometime when you want to think you're pretty good, sometime when you want to think you've got all the answers, read Ecclesiastes 7:13. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? And do you know what the answer is there? Thank you. Correct. Who can make it straight? No one. You're not going to overcome all of what God has done. what we do is we learn to live sometimes with what appears to be crooked, believing that's how God chose it to be. But I like straight lines. Get over it. The crooked might be there for a reason. See? And what I do is I try to adjust myself in the midst of a busy world that seemingly has so little time for anything, to really reflect upon what God is trying to do in my life and what He's been doing those past 20 years as I've lived for Him. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. And in the day of adversity, consider this: God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may find anything. Excuse me, I missed that. So that man may not find out anything that will be after him. So the point is, this is really not pessimistic. It's a plain fact. I can't discern the future. Had a wonderful time last night. Noah and Dee were over to the house. Noah's my grandson. Dee's his wife. They're wonderful. And they got this marvelous little 3-year-old who just directs everything. Rosie is just in charge. Wonderfully in charge. Not malicious, happy. No, Pop, do this. Okay, I can do that. But I can't discern the future Rosie's going to face. Can't do it. I can think about it, I can plan, I can help, I can encourage, but there are limits to my knowledge and my understanding. So, from the ancient book, I'm hearing the words, don't be troubled by that. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Enjoy where you are right now. For in the day of prosperity be joyful, in the day of adversity consider the fact that God has made the one as well as the other. And where we are in between is how we put it all together. Some of you faced adversity. I don't know what it was like, but you've been there. You know that.